Welcome to the NAATI CPI Test Preparation video series for Indigenous languages. This course is for interpreters who've already passed their NAATI ECIC test, the Ethical Competency and Intercultural Competency Test. So the first thing you need to do is get a copy of the workbook. If you don't have a copy of the PDF for this course, get in contact with NAATI to get a copy. You need to download that PDF and print it off so you can take notes in there and follow along with exercises. But that workbook also has links to videos, YouTube videos that might be part of the course. So then we'll be going through 8 video tutorials. This is the first one. And you'll need to watch the videos and complete the exercises in the workbook. It's best if you can do this together with a tutor and a language partner, just to check on your interpretations and give you feedback, and just because it's more fun. At the end of the course, you'll know if you're ready to sit the NAATI CPI test. So in this first video, we're going to give you an overview of the NAATI CPI test. We'll give you a quick rundown about NAATI, about the CPI certification, what skills are going to be assessed, and go through the structure and setup for test dialogues. So at the end of this, you should know what to expect when you sit your test. You'll understand those skills that you're going to be marked on, and you'll be familiar with the introduction and the setup of both the face-to-face and the phone dialogues. So what is NAATI? Well, I imagine people already know this, but just as a recap, NAATI is the National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters. And NAATI sets the standards and the tests for translators and interpreters all over Australia. International languages, sign languages, and Indigenous languages. Those standards are the same for Indigenous languages, which is why this is so respected amongst professionals and interpreters alike in different industries. If you have your NAATI certification, it's a bit like having your license to be an interpreter. People know that you've been assessed by respected markers and that you also have to engage in a system of recertification. That means you've got to maintain your standard as a strong interpreter. NAATI also does have the power to remove a certification if an interpreter isn't being ethical or if they're not meeting those standards anymore. So the biggest thing that's been happening in the NAATI space in the last 40 years is that NAATI has now brought in a new testing system, and that's what the CPI is a part of. NAATI is really important to a lot of interpreters and translators because it has that good reputation. If you have a chance, get onto YouTube and listen to some other interpreters and translators talking about what it means to them. So were you paying attention? What does NAATI stand for? N-A-A-T-I. Write it down in your workbook. And then I want you to have a think about why NAATI is important to you. Why are you doing this? So in this new certification system, we're looking at the Certified Provisional Interpreter certification, this red one here. It sits just above the Recognised Practicing Interpreter. This is a certification where you need to still pass your ECIC first, but there is not currently a NAATI test available for that language. So for most Aboriginal languages, NAATI is now trying to offer those tests, and we're offering them at the CPI level. So CPI interpreting is dialogue interpreting in general settings, and it's all consecutive interpreting. Once you've got your CPI, the one after is Certified Interpreter, and that test will also include not only this consecutive interpreting dialogues, but also sight translation, long consecutive interpreting, like for long speeches, as well as simultaneous interpreting, chuchotage. After that, NAATI is also developing specialised certifications, in both health and legal. Now, if you're already training to do your CPI test, you're probably already halfway through this pathway. But just to go through it from the start, when you're going to go for your NAATI certification, NAATI first needs to check that you have strong English and strong language, although NAATI don't check that, but we assume it from other evidence, and that you've done some interpreter training. Now, training for Indigenous language interpreting isn't widely available around Australia, so discuss this with NAATI if you think this is going to be a problem for you to satisfy. Then you go on to do the ethical competency and intercultural competency training and tests with NAATI. So people watching this have probably already completed this, and you do need to pass that test before you can go on to the CPI test. So the CPI test that we're now preparing for is 3 role plays, and you do have to pass all 3 of those to get your certification. Once you've got your certification, it's not the end of the story with NAATI. You have to maintain certification. So every 3 years, you'll need to send work logbooks and evidence of professional development to NAATI, showing that you have continued to work as an interpreter with that language that you're certified in, and that you've done some training to maintain your skills. Okay, so the CPI test is just interpreting. No questions, just 3 role plays. 2 face-to-face role plays and 1 phone role play. And they're all with live actors. So really it's just like a real interpreting job. For each role play, you'll get given a brief, a little paragraph about the scenario, the people who are talking to each other, whether it's a police interview or a interview between a doctor and a patient, something like that. You'll have 15 minutes to prepare for that scenario, so you might want to do some research on the internet or look words up in dictionaries. You can make notes, and you can take those notes into the dialogue. Then when you go in where the role players are waiting, you'll be interpreting for about 10 minutes. You can't take the notes out of the test. So with those 3 role plays all up, it goes for about an hour and a half. So a few questions just to see if you're paying attention, but also to reflect on what you might do. What will you do in the 15 minutes of preparation time? Are you somebody who uses the internet? Do you use dictionaries? What do you think you'll do with that time? Can you take notes in the test? Were you listening? I did give you the answer. Can you take notes out of the test? How many minutes of actual interpreting will you be marked on? Hit pause if you want time to write down or discuss these answers. Okay, before we get into the skills section, I'd like you to think about one of your mentor interpreters. What impressed you about their interpreting? Hit pause and discuss. These are the 6 skills that markers will have to mark you on during those 3 dialogues. First of all, they'll think about the core language skills, your English and language skills, and their strength for doing a job of interpreter. Then they'll look at the 4 interpreting skills. The first one is meaning transfer, and that means how accurately you transfer the meaning from one language to another. The next one is the consecutive mode or consecutive technique for interpreting. How well you interpret quickly and smoothly after each speaker, using first person, and having good memory skills to maintain that flow in that mode of interpreting. This means it's not using simultaneous interpreting. You must wait for the speaker to finish speaking. The next one is managing interaction, and that concentrates on how you manage cutting in, asking for repeats, what happens if the speakers are overlapping, how you manage those issues. Can you manage them politely, efficiently, and at a good time so it still flows for all the participants? Lastly, they'll assess speaking skills. Do you speak clearly, loud enough for everybody to hear, using good intonation? Can you adapt your volume and clarity if the speaker on the phone, for example, isn't very good and you need to be extra clear? And at the end of the day, the markers have to ask themselves, would they have been satisfied if that was a real job? So a bit of reflection time. Which skills do you feel strongest in? And which skills do you think you need to work on? Hit pause and answer these questions. Now there are a few things that are included in the test but aren't actually being marked. So that briefing section at the start when you do your preparation, that's not being marked. That's just for you to be able to perform better in the role play. When you walk in and you introduce yourself to the professional and to the language speaker, that part isn't being marked either. All interpreters do these sections a little bit differently, and this also allows for you to just relax into the rhythm of the interaction and not worry about being marked on that first section. When the English role player says, "Okay, let's start," you know that means that the marking part is starting. Body language and presentation isn't being marked either, unless it really interferes with the dialogue. And lastly, there's the question of dialects. If it doesn't interfere with the transfer of meaning and understanding between the language speaker and the interpreter, it's not an issue for different dialects of the same language to be used in the dialogue. The great thing about it being a live role play is that there's opportunity for you to clarify with each other if there's a particular word that is used from a different region or from a younger generation, or there's chance of misunderstanding between those dialects, you have a chance to clarify. So while we're on the topic of dialect, I'd like you to have a think about your dialect. How do you speak your language, and how does that differ from other speakers? Does your language have many dialects? Perhaps you speak a language from a large region and different communities speak differently, or maybe from different age groups. And think about your clients that you've interpreted for. Do you sometimes have to change the way you speak to adapt to that client? Hit pause now and have a think about it and discuss. Okay, so that's the main information that we wanted to deliver as part of this first overview for the CPI test. Here's a quick quiz to see you're paying attention. How many dialogues are there in the CPI test? What are the 6 skills that are being marked? What can you do during the preparation time? And what can't you do? Does it matter if you speak a different dialect to the role player? So we'll see if you're paying attention. You can hit pause and answer those questions now. Now our class isn't over yet. There's some exercises for you to do after we've finished this video. First of all, there's some exercises for you to set up the scenario for the role plays, both a face-to-face one and a phone dialogue. And I've given you the prompts for the introductory section. Like I said, that part isn't being marked, but it's good for you to practice this to know what to expect, and so you feel comfortable as you start the whole interaction. You've got those prompts and instructions on the next slides, and I'll just briefly pass through those before we finish the video. They should also be in your work booklet that you've printed out. After that, I also have included some test demonstration videos. They're dialogues that are CPI style dialogues. These ones are completed by an Arabic interpreter. So although you don't understand the Arabic, you can still keep in mind those 6 skills that we've been discussing that you're going to be marked on. It'll also give you a sense of how long the dialogues go for, how they feel, and so you'll get a good idea of how you think you might go in these dialogues yourself. Now this exercise is to get you comfortable with the setup and introduction sections of the dialogues. On page 8 of your workbook, you'll see this introduction to a dialogue, including the little brief narrative text. So read that, because that's what you'd do in the text. You'd have 15 minutes to prepare that, and then you'd knock on the door and go into the room with the role players that would be set up, like in the picture here, with the video camera recording everything, with an English role player and a language speaking role player and a test supervisor. So one person can play the role of the interpreter, and everybody talk through these introductory prompts, just so you get used to how a dialogue will start. Here's the test setup and introduction prompts for a phone dialogue. You'll need to set up speakers in a different room on speakerphone to play the parts of the booking officer and the dentist and the client, and the interpreter in another room on the phone. In your workbook, you'll find the link to a YouTube video of an Arabic interpreter sitting a CPI face-to-face dialogue. So watch the full dialogue. It goes for about 10 minutes, just like a normal CPI dialogue would. Make some notes about the interpreter's performance. Always easier to make comments about somebody else's performance. And think about those 6 skills that are being assessed. Once you've watched the face-to-face dialogue, there'll be another link there in your workbook to watch a phone dialogue with the same Arabic interpreter. Again, it's a dialogue that is a CPI length one. It's about 9 minutes long. So listen through and make notes about the interpreter's performance. Again, particularly on how this one is different, being a phone interpreting dialogue. And think about those 6 skills that are being assessed. So if you've made it to the end of those exercises and the end of this tutorial, you should now know what to expect when you sit the CPI test. You'll know what skills are being assessed and what's not being assessed, and you'll be familiar with the setup and the introductory sections of both the face-to-face and the phone dialogues. In the next tutorial, we'll start getting into those skills that are being assessed in more detail, and the first one will be meaning transfer, or interpreting accurately. See you then.